Coming up on Arirang News, almost all of South Korea is blanketed by a severe yellow dust storm that originated from China. There's an advisory issued as the fine dust density levels in most parts of the country have reached their highest this year. South Korea's employment figure improved on-year in March compared to the previous month for the first time in 10 months, thanks to people going out more. But the rebound was driven mostly by those aged 60 and above. A Korean literary treasure, Jikji, is on public display for the first time in 50 years. The 14th century book is the world's oldest still in existence to be printed on a movable metal typeface. It's currently in Paris as part of an exhibition on the history of printing technology. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in South Korea. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. It's the worst yellow dust to be witnessed this spring. Today, South Korea was blanketed under severe yellow dust storm coming in from China, with the fine dust density level hitting an all-time high this year. The Korean authorities have raised their alert level, calling for public caution. Lee Soo-jin starts our coverage tonight.
South Korea is engulfed in fine dust. The Ministry of Environment on Wednesday at 7 a.m. issued a fine dust advisory at caution, the second lowest of the 4 levels. That's 1 level higher than the advisory that was previously issued at attention. Fine dust advisories are issued when yellow dust levels remain above 150 micrograms for more than 2 hours. The fine dust particles smaller than 10 micrometers in diameter, also referred to as PM10, reached the highest level seen this year. The average hourly concentration of fine dust reached 277 micrograms per cubic meter across the country at 1 p.m., surpassing the previous high of 125 micrograms per cubic meter in January. As of 2 p.m. on Wednesday, yellow dust levels reached 227 micrograms per cubic meter in Seoul, 267 in Gyeonggi-do province, and 220 in Busan. You can see a yellow hue in the sky, and it's almost difficult to breathe due to how much dust is in the air. People are currently being advised to stay indoors, and for those who have to go outside, masks are a must. The skyline is also currently obscured by the fine dust. The National Institute of Environmental Research is forecasting that the fine dust level will remain at very bad levels on Thursday as well. This is when fine dust concentrations reached 151 micrograms or above. The northwest winds carried the yellow dust from Inner Mongolia, which quickly spread to 18 regions in China, such as Shanghai and Tianjin. On Monday and Tuesday, the yellow dust swept across China, and it became difficult for even cars to pass due to the sand piling up on streets. South Korean Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, during a press briefing on Tuesday, called on relevant ministries to make sure measures are put in place to protect people in the country. He also called on the people to check that windows are closed properly and to refrain from any outdoor activities. Elderly citizens, especially, are asked to stay indoors. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
The Pentagon chief says it'll continue to look for the origin of the alleged leak of classified U.S. documents, while involved countries, including South Korea, the UK, and France, say the information in the document is either fabricated or inaccurate. Bae Eun-ji has more.
Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin said the U.S. will continue to investigate until the source is found, saying the country will turn over every rock. Speaking to reporters Tuesday local time, he also said they'll work closely with its allies and partners to secure the U.S.
I will tell you that we take this very seriously, and we will continue to investigate and turn over every rock until we find the source of this and the extent of it.
He also said the Pentagon was aware that documents had been posted dated February 28th and March 1st, but was not sure if there were other documents that had been online before. The leaked classified Pentagon documents suggested that the U.S. most likely spied on South Korea, as it included sensitive conversations between top South Korean security officials. It showed that the senior South Korean officials were concerned that ammunition sold to the U.S. could be sent to Ukraine, potentially violating the country's policy of not supplying lethal weapons to the war-torn country. This raised concerns in South Korea that the U.S. had been wiretapping the country's National Security Office. But the presidential office quickly dismissed these concerns, saying eavesdropping or wiretapping of internal conversations is impossible, and said much of the information is fabricated.
The two countries have agreed that much of the disclosed information has been altered.
Seoul's Foreign Minister Park Jin also told reporters on Wednesday that a considerable amount of information in the document appears to be fabricated, and stressed South Korea will not be supplying lethal weapons to Ukraine. One of the leaked documents also claimed that the UK is among a number of countries with special forces operating in Ukraine. The BBC reported that as many as 50 UK Special Forces personnel have been deployed to the country, according to the document dated March 23rd. The UK's Ministry of Defense said on Twitter that the information has a serious level of inaccuracy and warned against taking the allegations at face value. The paper shared on social media also contained data on countries including France and Israel, but both countries firmly denied those claims. 배은지, Arirang News.
In less than 2 months, a new consular agency will be launched as part of the Korean government's efforts to better deal with the interests of Koreans overseas. More progress has been made for that. Our National Assembly correspondent Han Sung-woo tells us more.
South Korea will formally announce in the coming days where it will establish its soon-to-be-launched new agency devoted to consular affairs, dealing specifically with the lives and interests of Koreans overseas. After a meeting on Wednesday with the Foreign Ministry at the National Assembly, South Korea's ruling party told reporters it has come greatly close to reaching a consensus on the matter.
We've come to an agreement with the government that the consular agency should be located in an area that meets various standards, including accessibility for Koreans overseas, consistency with government organization, regional association and symbolism, as well as balanced regional development.
The agency, which was an election pledge of President Yoon Suk-yeol, is scheduled to be launched June 5th. But before that, the People Power Party and the government will try to take care of related legal matters as soon as possible by getting the Framework Act on Overseas Koreans passed by the National Assembly.
The Foreign Ministry has devised a mechanism for the employment succession of employees who have been progressing their careers at the Overseas Koreans Foundation.
Several local governments, including the cities of Incheon and Gwangju, have voiced their desire to host the agency. Asked whether factoring in balanced regional development means Seoul will not be chosen as the site, Minister Park avoided a direct response, replying instead that all considerations will be comprehensively taken into account. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
The leaders of South Korea and Portugal have agreed to expand economic cooperation in chips and electric vehicles. According to Seoul's top office, President Yoon Suk-yeol on Wednesday held an informal summit with Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Costa, who is on an official visit to South Korea. The two leaders exchanged views on bilateral relations and economic cooperation, with Yoon remarking that the two countries have great potential for collaboration in future industries, namely semiconductors and EV batteries. Prime Minister Costa also called for cooperation in those sectors, along with new and renewable energy and automobile parts. Remarking on their long-standing bilateral ties, Yoon also requested Costa's support as South Korea bids to host the 2030 World Expo in the southern coastal city of Busan. Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund has once again lowered its growth outlook for South Korea this year to 1.5%. But it's on par with the IMF's projections for other major economies. Shin Se-byuk with more.
The International Monetary Fund on Tuesday cut its 2023 economic growth outlook for South Korea to 1.5%. That's down 0.2 percentage points from its estimate in January. It's also slightly below the Bank of Korea's projection of 1.6% made in February. The IMF did not explain the reasons behind the adjustment to its outlook, but it could be largely attributed to growing concerns that aggressive monetary tightening policies may impede global economic growth. In fact, earlier in the day, the BOK froze its key interest rate at 3.5% for the second time straight due to growing concerns over an economic slowdown. The 1% range projection for South Korea is on par with projections for other major economies. The IMF expects the U.S. economy to grow 1.6%, Japan's 1.3%, and Canada's to see 1.5% growth. But this would mark only the fifth time in history that South Korea's economic growth fell below 2%. The last time it grew below 2% was in 2020, when the Korean economy contracted by 0.7% during the COVID-19 pandemic. Meanwhile, the IMF said the global economy faces a rocky road to recovery in 2023, edging down its global economic outlook to 2.8%. That's 0.1 of a percentage point lower than its previous forecast. The organization said lingering global economic uncertainties, such as the war in Ukraine and persistently high inflation, are affecting growth. Despite these grim figures, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, in a news conference on Tuesday, was rather optimistic about the outlook.
I do think the outlook is reasonable. It's certainly stronger, brighter than the last time we had the annual meetings in October. I wouldn't overdo the negativism about the global economy.
Yellen said a number of economies, including the United States, were proving resilient with strong labor markets, easing supply chain problems, and lowering energy costs. She also said the global financial system was also resilient due to reforms enacted after the 2008 financial crisis. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
South Korea's employment figure improved on-year in March compared to previous month for the first time in 10 months, thanks to people going out more. But the rebound was driven mostly by those aged 60 and above. Our Shin Ha-young explains. South Korea's 9-month decline for on-year job growth finally came to the end in March. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, there were 28.2 million people in employment last month, up around 469,000 from the previous year. This marks growth for the 25th consecutive month. However, it's the first time that growth exited the previous month in 10 months after consecutive declines were recorded beginning in June 2022. Statistics Korea says the data is in line with efforts to embrace a return to normal life under eased COVID-19 restrictions, which has resulted in an increase in outdoor activities. Job growth was driven by people aged 60 and above, which had the largest increase among all age groups with 547,000 on year. On the other hand, employment figures for those in their 20s and below, and also for those in their 40s, dropped from the previous year. New jobs were mainly created in the healthcare and social assistance sector, with 186,000 people hired, followed by 177,000 jobs in the accommodation and restaurant sectors. Jobs were lost in the manufacturing, retail, wholesale, and construction industries. Meanwhile, during a job task force meeting on Wednesday, the first vice finance minister announced that the government has selected several industries to focus on in order to bolster employment.
We will discuss specific plans to attract and train more workers, improve working conditions and bolster support for job matching in 4 industries, including domestic construction, shipping, fisheries and resource recycling sectors that have been experiencing a shortage of labour.
According to the minister, the number of job vacancies in February increased to around 210,000 after a slight decrease in January. He added that industries such as shipbuilding and healthcare are still having difficulties finding enough workers. During the meeting, ways to solve the labor shortage were discussed, and the government is planning to announce specific measures regarding the matter in the future. 신하영, Arirang News.
As the world approaches towards post-pandemic era, South Korea's Incheon International Airport is once again bustling with travelers, especially visitors from all over the world. And it's not just the airport getting busy, but related services linked to travelers. Our Choi Soo-hyung takes a closer look.
After a long and challenging 3 years due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Incheon International Airport is now gradually regaining its vitality. With many restrictions for overseas travelers lifted, the airport has resumed 24-hour operations. Travelers are now able to use the airport freely without wearing masks, and their faces are full of expectation for their trips.
Trip to Korea. Yes, it's a nice trip. Yes, people are good looking. And the food is delicious.
To cope with the increasing number of visitors, transportation services such as airport buses and taxis for foreign travelers have also returned to operating as normal. According to airport officials, the number of airport bus users in Seoul is 17 times higher than last year. In February alone, over 340,000 people used the airport buses, and there are plans for additional bus routes as the number of passengers continues to surge. Travelers from South Korea's neighbor Japan have been a recent surge after visa restrictions were lifted toward the end of last year.
So this is our first time after the COVID-19 ended, so we are very excited about traveling over here, and we're going to stay almost 5 days, so we're kind of looking forward to our stays in Korea.
Love Korea, 좋아요.
With China increasing international flights from late March, even more travelers could pass through Incheon International Airport in the coming months. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
In other news, community transmission of mpox, the disease formerly known as monkeypox, is reportedly on the rise in South Korea. The Korea Disease Control Prevention Agency reported 2 more confirmed cases on Wednesday, bringing the total number of infections to 8. The 2 patients are South Korean nationals living in Seoul with no recent overseas travel history, and the KDCA is assuming they had close contact with those infected. Both patients tested positive after visiting medical centers with a skin rash. South Korea's first case of mpox was confirmed last June, and the first 5 cases were linked to overseas travel. For the first time in half a century, a Korean literary treasure called Jikji, a book that was printed in the 14th century, is on public display in Paris as part of the exhibition on the history of printing technology. Our culture correspondent Song Yujin reports.
The world's oldest surviving book, made using movable metal printing, meets the public again. Korea's Jikji 심체요절, a UNESCO memory of the World Heritage, is being shown to the public for the first time in 50 years. It's on display at the National Library of France from Wednesday as part of an exhibition on the history of printing. The book contains the teachings of great Buddhist priests. For the display, it has been opened on a page about non-duality, one of the key beliefs of Buddhism. The essence of non-dualism is that 2 things that seem separate from one another, such as good and evil, are in fact not separate at all. Jikji's history dates all the way back to the 14th century. The book was printed at the Heungdeok Temple in Chungcheongbuk-do Province's Cheongju City in 1377 during the Goryeo dynasty. That's 78 years before the Gutenberg Bible, the first complete book to be printed on movable metal type in Europe. In the late 19th century, Jikji was moved to France by then chargé d'affaires of the French embassy in Seoul. In 1911, it was purchased by a French art collector through an auction. It was later donated to the National Library of France in 1952 and has been kept in the library storage since then, only going on display in 1972 and 1973. The exhibition in Paris will run until July 16th. 송유진, Arirang News.
South Korea's unmanned lunar orbiter, the Danuri, sends back photographs of the moon's far side featuring vivid images of craters. It's the first time that the nation has taken photos of that side of the moon. Jung Eun-ju has more.
South Korea's first unmanned lunar orbiter, the Danuri, has sent photos of the moon's far side. The high-definition images were taken during its current mission and released on Wednesday by the Ministry of Science and ICT and the Korea Aerospace Research Institute. Danuri, which is rotating around the moon 100 kilometers above the surface, took pictures of the Tsiolkovsky crater, a large crater on the back of the moon, on March 22nd. Pictures of the Valles Schrödinger and Szilard M craters were also taken on March 24th. They are the first photos of the moon's far side that South Korea has taken. The lunar orbiter also sent back separate photos of the Vicomin crater taken with its wide-angle polarimetric camera, or PolCam for short. This device is designed to study the moon's surface composition and its volcanic deposits by measuring the degree of polarization. The Science Ministry said the magnetic field meter and gamma-ray spectrometer on Danuri are also obtaining observation data. Danuri entered the lunar orbit on December 27th last year after 145 days of traveling from Earth and started its operation on February 4th, about a month after test runs. The lunar orbiter is assigned to measure the terrain, magnetic strengths, gamma rays, and other traits of the lunar surface using 6 onboard instruments until the end of this year. The orbiter will also identify potential landing sites for future lunar missions. The Science Ministry said the public can check Danuri's real-time location, along with its photos and collected data, by visiting the orbiter's official website. Jung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
On the medical front, the latest local campaign against cancer revolves around the task of reversing lung cancer cells to a treatable phase. Jo Sung-min explains.
Lung cancer was the #1 cause of death among all cancer patients in South Korea in 2021, according to a government report. If detected early, lung cancer can be fully cured. But the survival rate plummets to 9% once the cancer spreads to other organs. To increase the survival rate, a South Korean research team has developed new technology that potentially enhances how the disease is treated. It's based on reversing cancerous cells into a condition where they can be treated. Before this technology was developed, cancerous cells or tumors in their early stages were not treatable with existing medication. And when they deteriorate, they spread to other parts of the body. The scientists used computer simulations to analyze lung cancer genes and discovered 3 key genes that can be reverted back to the non-spreading phase, which makes them treatable.
By inputting components of the lung cancer cells with the ability to spread to other organs into a computer simulation, we found the genetic combinations that can switch the cells back to the stage stripped of metastasis.
In addition, this method doesn't just apply to lung cancer. The researchers said the discovery is meaningful in that it paves the way for a new method to treat the disease.
Because this treatment method involves changing the cancer cells' characteristics, not killing them, it has a minimal effect on the normal cells. It's a new concept of treatment that's like safely treating diabetes or high blood pressure and maintaining health for a long time.
The team plans to commercialize this technology with a local bio company. They expect to carry out a clinical trial on people in the next 5 to 6 years. Jo Sung-min, Arirang News.
Clear skies are back in the forecast and temperatures will be rising from this point on. Although do expect wide temperature gaps as morning conditions may temporarily get chilly. Daytime highs will quickly rise to 20 degrees or higher. Heavy layers of fine dust blanketed South Korea today for some regions. Dust concentrations are about 5 to 10 times higher than usual. This is due to strong gusty winds that's carrying in a combination of fine dust and yellow dust from overseas. The entire nation will see air quality standing in the very bad category. In fact, a yellow dust alert has been issued tonight. Under such conditions, it is highly recommended to refrain from outdoor activities. Sunny spells will be dominating nationwide. Seoul and Daegu will be starting off at 6 degrees. And daytime highs will be jumping significantly. Seoul will get up to 20 degrees, Gwangju 24, and Gyeongju will be warm at 26 degrees. On Saturday, nationwide showers are in the forecast. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all for tonight's newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with the most up-to-date news tomorrow. Have a good night.